All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. The guest on this episode is someone who's been on the show before, I think a couple times now, but this is the first
Yeah,
time you've been on the show in this context. I mean, in previous appearances, you've been with bands, and you have a kind of exciting new project that we're going to talk about today. So I think the best way to start this off is if you want to just introduce yourself and maybe give a bit of background about what you've done in the music scene, because I think a lot of people would recognize you from various projects over the
sure.
years.
Yeah. I'm Josh, played in generally rock and metal bands over the last 25 years or so. Most notably, probably Electric Quarterstaff.
Yeah.
Did some rock stuff in the 2000s with, geez, if I could, we might be here all day if I name them all.
Right.
But
There's a list. There's a list of them. People have seen you.
yeah,
In a lot of
most
bands,
recently, yeah, Witch Trip and El Diablo.
Cool. And then you have a new project, which is a solo project, which I guess is very different than what you've done, that people would know you for. So what's the background on that?
I've always been sort of a tinkerer with music. I love creating just on my own and either showing it to people or showing it to people and collaborating. So I've got a backlog of songs and
Cool.
just haven't had a sort of box to put them in. But yeah, pandemic came and bands jammed less. So
That was going to be my next question. Yeah, is this a pandemic project? It definitely seems like
yeah.
it is, because people are finding time to do something a little different and maybe experiment a bit more, because there's just been this free time with no shows and no rehearsals or nothing.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I just decided to focus my efforts on myself, and as most or many people have, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm having a blast doing it. So
cool. Well, and I guess sonically this is a little different too. I was listening to the demos today, and I mean it's electronic music. First of all, it has
yeah,
I think to my untrained ear with electronic music, I feel like it has some of the edge that a lot of your heavier stuff had, but it's
definitely.
presented a little bit differently, right? So what's the kind of genesis of this style with you? Like, have you always been interested in doing this kind of thing?
Yeah. I think actually the keyboard was my first instrument.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Not that I was any good at it, but I've always had it. Some of those old sampling Casio keyboards, and
those things are awesome.
They were amazing. I that was like the start of me writing music when I was 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Record the songs to tape and had friends come over and do silly vocals over top. But enough about that. I don't think the Godblender project is that far off from the metal and rock bands that I've been in, at least sonically. Like all of those tones are there. Like it can be aggressive at times, it can be melodic at times, it can be at least structurally pretty similar to a typical rock song, or 3.5 minutes. You got to start, or a intro, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus kind of thing. So it's not straying too far from that structure, as opposed to some of the freeform electronic that's out there.
Sure. Yeah, you're still doing heavy music, right? I mean, it's just a little bit of a different palette you're using to put it together.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those songs started on the electric guitar. So
okay, that's not surprising. Having listened to it, that's not surprising at all. Is it weird to do you have to like separate your thought process to kind of transpose that over to electronic stuff, or is it still sort of the same like structure in your head when you're putting this together?
Yeah, it generally starts in 2 different ways. As I said earlier, on the electric guitar, and even fully fleshed out on the electric guitar, and then sort of like laid out on the keyboard, or with a arpeggio or a drum beat or something, and then sort of builds and changes and evolves that way. And sometimes it starts with the drums, or it starts with just a looping bass line that I put together and just started putting melodic parts over top.
would these tracks have been like, if the pandemic hadn't happened, if your bands had been able to continue sort of straight through, do you think that
Mhm.
these would have ended up as songs in Witch Trip or in some other project?
No,
No, there's
no, I don't think
what's the
so.
difference then? I guess what's the difference for you as a writer that makes these sort
Um,
of standalone as this?
I think they are a bit more nostalgic
Okay,
sounding. Um, they have an 80s feel to them. They've got an early 90s feel to them, which this is a huge influence, and in it can be an influence in some of the rock and metal stuff
sure,
I've put out. But yeah, I think it's a lot of these songs don't fit as well,
okay.
with a rock band or a metal band. And I've
Well,
experimented. Like I've gone back and forth. There's been songs where I've recorded two versions.
okay,
There's a metal version and then there's the electronic version. And there's always a winner, at least for me.
right, right.
So if
Well,
I'm
that kind
ever
of leads to another question. Though, if sorry to interrupt, but like, I know we're sort of far off from that right now because no one knows what's happening with the pandemic and everything. But
Mhm.
are you planning on playing these live? And if so, are you planning on keeping it as a solo thing, or is this something you could foresee becoming a bigger project? With still the electronic elements, but some live instruments as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm working on figuring out how to do that. And it would involve bringing in some players, because the idea of, for me anyways, just standing on stage by myself, playing one instrument while
Yeah,
there's, a dozen others in the background. It, I don't think that works for me. Like I like the idea of, a live drummer. There are guitar passages in the songs,
yeah,
so bass obviously, and then focusing on maybe the lead or something else to focus on live. I think
yeah,
that could do well. I mean, obviously the some of the stuff would be um, tracks, in order to play it with a completely live band. I think it would just be too many
sure,
cooks in the kitchen. But
sure.
the idea of a three-piece really appeals to me, like drummer, guitar, keyboard.
Yeah, that would be cool. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, is that kind of in the cards though? Or I mean, when you started this during the pandemic, was it just sort of, I guess, like, to rewind a bit? I mean, I feel like over the course of the past 2 and a bit years, I've been talking to everyone about the pandemic. Everyone who comes on the show is dealing with it in some way or another in terms of how
Hmm.
it's affecting them as musicians, right? And like, some people are seem to be either one or the other. It's either they're super creative and they have this rush of ideas and things they want to record, or they are recording and all these crazy projects, or they're just completely stumped and they can't like, they just
Yeah.
can't. And it sounds like you seem more like the latter in the sense that you have, or that's, or the former in the sense that you have the stuff you've been working on. But what has, I mean, how has this affected you sort of creatively? As this you're clearly been busy,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
mean, has it
Busy.
impacted you? Has it affected your sort of the way you write, or your kind of willingness to
Definitely.
write even?
Yeah, because putting together a fleshed out electronic song, as much as I had tinkered in the past with flourishes here and there in
Yeah,
some of my bands, I've never done that and released it. So it was sort of um, it was scary in a way to like step out of you know the scene a bit.
yeah.
Um,
Well, because you've been there for 25 years, like you said, right? I mean, it's been your
yeah,
whole life basically has been playing in that scene.
pretty close. Yeah, since well, yeah, it's I think when people hear it, they'll find that it could appeal to sort of some of the people that I've been around in the scene for as long as I have. I think when people hear it, it's not going to be that far, out to space.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's
it, it it's scary in a way, like I said, but yeah, I think there's some common ground there.
How has it been received so far? I know you're working on getting a proper EP out, but you have these demos that have been out there for a while now. I guess some of them 6-7 months. Right? What is that kind of? How have they been received by people who have, I'm sure most people hearing them are people who have played in bands with you or have heard you play in bands, and they have an idea of what your sound is.
Yeah.
Like, what's the reaction been to this stuff?
There's, I've had a few people reach out to me and tell me that, they dig what's going on, and a few people that I haven't heard from, which is to be expected.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, I don't know if it's seen as like a novelty or something that, I'm just doing in my spare time, but yeah, like I'm pretty focused on this right now, and not that I'll never play metal again, because I absolutely will.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can. If I had to guess, I'd say some of my friends were maybe a little surprised, but I've had positive feedback.
Cool. Well, that's good. I mean, that's what you want, especially if you're planning on, continuing with this for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
How does, again, not to dwell on the pandemic, because I'm really sick of talking about it, like just in general. I'm sure you are too. But what is, now that shows are starting to come back, and now that, it looks like bands are able to finally get some semblance of normalcy in the relatively near future, how does that impact sort of the timing of this? You've had the pandemic to work on this. You've been necessarily kind of locked up like everyone has been, and focused on this project, and now suddenly, as you're about to, you want to get this released, now everything else is coming back and bands are coming back, and you can do that side of things too. What's the impact on this project?
So far, none of my other bands are practicing right now, so
okay.
Yeah, and for various reasons, it's the pandemic's partly to blame, and sometimes you take a year off from something and people find other things to do and find other things to occupy their time with. So yeah, it's, as of right now, it's the only thing musically, at least, I have going on right now.
Cool. Was there a learning curve to just like handling the I know you've been in a lot of projects that have recorded in the past. You're very familiar with how that works, but just in terms of recording electronic music and just like the art of putting the whole thing together, was that did that take a bit of like an uphill battle to figure that out?
Yeah, I think I recorded 12 songs before I recorded the last 3, which you've heard now.
Okay.
Yeah, it took a lot of recording, adjusting, editing, throwing it away, recording, adjusting, editing, throwing it away, and then sort of like honing in on what it was that I was comfortable with and what it was that I felt I was capable of. So I'm still learning.
Yeah.
And as I was, as a guitar player, I was always learning. I hope to always be inspired and find new things and throw away tracks and come out with new ones.
Get cut out the stuff that doesn't work and keep the for sure. I would hope most people do that, right? It's a good strategy to have. Yeah,
well, hopefully I'm not filtering out too much, but
right. I think that, like, in listening to the tracks that you have out now, the demos, and I feel like this with a lot of electronic music, it has the tendency, and not that metal doesn't do this, but it has the tendency to kind of be very I don't know if atmospheric is the right word, but it seems very like scene setting,
cinematic,
right? It's cinematic. Yeah. It seems like it's definitely acting more as like color to some kind of an event rather than being the event itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's got to be different to write to when you're making something that is maybe like, I feel like heavier music is more or less the emotional aspect of it is front and center, and it's not subtle, right? It can be, but just in general, you're playing in a fast, heavy band. That the feeling part of it is right there in your face, right? And this is a little bit different because it's slower. It's slower building to that kind of emotional, climax or whatever you want to call it. What is that like, kind of piecing that part of it together? Because it obviously has feeling to it, right? It's not
Mhm.
just a bunch of bleeps and bloops devoid
Right.
of emotion, right? I mean, there's that element of it is still there. Is it like, do you feel like you have more time or more space, maybe even in these kind of
Yeah,
songs to pull those out?
absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes I'm finding I'm, stacking too much, at one time,
Right,
and I have to like
right.
pull it back. And sometimes that's some like part of the process for me anyways, is building the song out, putting, a bunch of parts in, and then sitting there and saying, okay, what do I want to take away now?
Right,
What,
right.
how can I get what I'm trying to get across more efficiently, so that it's not like, you're focusing on like too many things at once and you're just sort of losing it. So um, that probably, adds to that sort of more dynamic or atmospheric sound. And I think just with the style that I'm sort of focusing on, which some might call synthwave or dark synth or whatever,
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of movie soundtrack influence,
for sure.
specifically like 80s action movies and stuff like that.
Well, when you said the '80s, that definitely made me think of that. It's like, oh yeah, this totally sounds like it could be in the background of an '80s movie for sure. Yeah,
Yeah. And or like a awesome, racing game from the 90s,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's not what I'm like intending, but as I'm building the tracks and those influences start to pop out, it's like, okay, I see where this is coming from.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that subconscious stuff that just kind of reveals itself as you're making it, right?
Oh yeah.
So that's yeah.
Yeah.
What's I mean, are there certain artists that influence this particularly? I mean, I know like we've kind of just talked about just now, like those kind of
Hmm.
elements like movie soundtracks and video games and things like that sort of seep through. But are there other artists that are doing something similar that you were listening to heavily sort of in the lead up to this?
Yeah. And a lot of them are either former or current like metal musicians or
Yeah,
metal
that's a
like
that's a thing, right? I mean,
adjacent. Yeah.
it seems like even
um
locally, there's people from who have been in metal bands or are in metal bands who are doing shit like this, and it's cool. Like,
Maybe
what is
it's
it?
like
Why does
just
that happen?
getting older.
Yeah,
Who knows? Maybe it's like challenging myself. And but to answer your question,
yeah.
Carpenter Brute um is a huge one.
Okay.
Just he was an engineer, so audio engineer, who's doing a lot of heavier bands out in I think he's from France, but
Oh, cool.
and then he just decided one day, with his knowledge of like sonic, um, you know, uh, sonic, you know,
Well, is
uh,
textures maybe the right word? Because it seems like this stuff is
textures.
very textural. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He just decided to go for it, and so that was a big influence. And um, when I heard that, I was like, okay, this is put together in a way I understand.
Right.
Where listening to, like Aphex Twin or something, that's just,
It's like another universe, right? Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
another universe. Like it
yeah.
doesn't compute for me.
For sure. No, I can
But
see that. Yeah,
but hearing something that's, you know, where the synth lead works just as well as a guitar lead,
yeah,
and hearing that like packaged with like an aggressive bass and like loud drums, it's like, okay, this makes sense to me.
yeah.
I can like transfer my skills in this way and keep myself interested.
It is kind of cool how that is a thing though. Like people who play metal music and all the various subgenres of metal, you often see them kind of venturing over into the electronic side of things. And there's obviously been some high profile crossover. I mean,
Yeah.
between those two genres, like for years, right? But it's interesting. I don't know the answer to that to why, but yeah, it's could be just getting old and people are more willing to tinker and do things like kind of at home rather than go out and
Yeah.
practice 12 times a week or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. And there's an allure to the gear that's involved too. And
Yeah. Well, and you can still have that heaviness too, right? As a one man project, which you couldn't
Absolutely,
necessarily
and that's
get
a good point.
if you had an acoustic guitar and you're doing folk versions of songs. That's cool too, but it doesn't
Yeah,
have that same kind of just like overbearing heaviness that you can get out of a distorted guitar or
that's right. Yeah, the drive is, it's the drive and like the perceived aggressiveness of the music.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of distortion involved, and there's a lot of like evil minor keys,
dark sounding stuff. Yeah.
dark sounding stuff. Absolutely. Yeah.
What I mean, this maybe is too big of a question for the purposes of the podcast, but what is the draw of that stuff to you? Like, I mean, just in this conversation here, people listening to it for the first time who don't know you, well, you seem like a very calm, very, not the type of person you'd expect is listening to just like crazy heavy stuff, right? But
Right.
What is it about the dark, the dark music or the aggressive music that appeals to you as a listener?
That's a good question. It's just, it makes you feel like moving in a way, it just takes a hold of you and makes you want to go out and do something, even though you might not feel like it at the time.
Which I guess is the thing about every good kind of music, right? Is it does that in some way. It grabs you and makes you want to do something, whatever it is. Like, I mean, yeah, I can see the parallels to something like funk or even hip hop or electronic music. I mean, there's so many different genres that's what they do, right? That it just, I guess Absolutely. It makes you want to react to the music in whatever way whatever form that takes, right?
Absolutely.
So this is, I mean, by the time people hear this, the release likely won't be out. Your demos are available now. What's your sort of plan for rolling this out to people to hear the finished product?
Yeah, I'm looking to collaborate on some future material. So a big part of me wanting to get this out is to, say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Hit me up. I can only work on music by myself for so long. Would be nice to get some, some vocals or, another ear involved and just see where it goes and just step out of, the box that I put myself in.
Yeah.
With playing metal for as long as I have.
Yeah. Do you have sort of a timeline on when you want to get this actually properly released and mixed and all of that stuff?
Yeah. The EP should be out this month.
Cool.
And I will follow that up with another EP. I might sort of follow a similar release schedule as previously mentioned Carpenter Brute, who had 3 EPs and then sort of combine those into his first LP.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Before putting out a first official LP. So,
right.
Just allows me to sort of focus the direction and see where I want to take this.
Well, this may be something I was meaning to ask you earlier. Is I imagine for this kind of stuff, there's probably a decent community online of people who are making this kind of music and probably sharing it as well, right? Has that have you found kind of like like-minded people out there who are doing something that
I have, but
connects?
You know what, I've reached out to some friends who are musicians, and most of them are not involved in electronic music.
Yeah.
And I think partly because I want them to step out of their box,
right,
and
join you in the new box.
Yeah. Absolutely. But there's a huge community and a ton of great music being put out, and a lot of it is underground. There's a few bigger artists that like Gunship and Perturbator and yeah.
Well, I guess the reason I was asking that is because does that kind of having that community, I guess, online that celebrates this kind of music, does that affect how you're planning on releasing this once you actually have the EPs done and everything? I mean, are you intending to release something physically here in Winnipeg, or is it going to be an online only project, or what are you looking at?
I think for now just online, but in the future, I'd like to package it in some form or another. I mean, you can tell I'm a huge fan of CDs. So
yeah, me too. Same here. Yeah. There are a few of us left.
CD's not dead, but it would be nice to to have something physical to put on the big stereo and stuff like that.
Totally. How do people find this now? I mean, I know you're sort of just launching this, over the past few months as the solo project. But what's the best way to track it down if someone wants to check it out?
Yeah, right now I do have a Bandcamp, and I think there's a couple other Godblenders on there. So forgive me if I get this wrong.
Well, you know what? Before you say the URL, I'll link to it in the show notes. So if you got a Bandcamp, that'll work better, because every time anyone tries to tell me the address of their Bandcamps, it's always like, one letter wrong or something. So we'll save you the trouble. But so Godblender on Bandcamp.
Yeah, and SoundCloud, I think it's Godblender Music is what you would search, and we'll link to that as well, I'm sure. So
cool. Yeah, I'll put that in there as well. Is there, I mean, if someone hears this and wants to, like you're saying, you want to collaborate with people, what's the best way to get in touch with you for that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you can message me through SoundCloud.
Okay.
That's probably the best way, apart from giving out my email on the internet, which, I'm sure you could find it if you wanted, but that, or if you know me, just hit me up. Cool. And I do have some friends that we have plans for collaboration. I don't know if I can announce anything yet, but there'll be some pretty fun stuff coming out.
Awesome. Under the Godblender name, or is this gonna be something different?
Yeah. Well, who knows? Definitely under the Godblender name, but perhaps in other forms as well.
Right on.
Yeah.